they're both either going out or they don't have any
Yeah.
family support or, I
Oh,
don't know.
we're in the zone.
Oh,
Sorry to catch you up. We're in the zone.
sounds good.
Good morning and welcome to this session of Business Breeders, a live webinar series hosted by Goodman Group at Brock University. My name is Abdul Rahimi and it's my distinct pleasure to serve as the director of Goodman Group and the Goodman School of Business here at bright and beautiful Niagara. Goodman Group is a community-focused learning and development services provider that works to support professionals, businesses and entrepreneurs pursuing growth through accredited professional development certificate programs, executive education, consulting services, and startup support. It's my pleasure to welcome the over 100 of you to today's session by taking time out of your busy schedule and lives and taking your break with us today as part of this webinar. This webinar series aims to provide 45-minute breathers filled with insightful discussions on timely topics that are relevant to businesses and everyday lives. These sessions are led by our award-winning Brock University faculty and leading industry experts who encourage thoughtful debates and keeping us all feeling connected all together. This webinar series is hosted from 11 to 11:45. In a moment, I'll hand the screen over to today's webinar lead. That's Dr. Asma Zafar, who will lead today's discussion. Asma will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll spend some time answering your questions. So you can pose your questions using any of the following three methods. You can post your questions at the time of registration, and thank you for all of you that you've done so. We've already received a number of questions through that format. You may also type your questions live in the chat feature, which is open now. And by the way, say hi to Sultana, who is moderating that for us this morning. You can also tweet your questions and comments live at GSB Goodman Group, all one word. At the end of the webinar, I'll provide you with details on how you may access today's webinar readings, as well as the recording. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce today's webinar lead. Dr. Asma Zafar is an assistant professor of strategy in the Department of Marketing, International Business and Strategy at the Goodman School of Business. She completed her PhD at the University of Alberta, where she specialized in strategic management and organization. Her research interests include organizational responses to environmental disruptions. Well, pandemic, is that an environmental disruption? I think that we might be onto something. Asma is also a Brock alum, having completed her Master's of Science in Management at Brock University within the Goodman School of Business, and her prior professional experience also having worked in the financial and educational sectors across different countries. Asma, glad to have you on here this morning. Welcome, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Hello, everyone. I am thrilled that you were able to join today. I have to say that as researchers, we're always looking for opportunities to connect back with our communities, and I'm so grateful that over 100 of you were able to join today. Also, a quick shout out to Abdul and team for allowing this to happen today. So without any further ado, let me just dive right in.
Oh, thank you, Asma, for that shout out. I always like to have those pieces in there. You know, does nothing to my ego at all.
Okay.
This is all about you. Over to you.
All right. Okay, so I titled today's presentation, Who We Are and Who We Can Be, an important strategic reflection in times of disruption. So let me tell you what we will be doing today. I will introduce the topic. I'll tell you what we are talking about today, a few quick takeaways from today's topic. I'll say, why does it matter, and why does it especially matter in the times of disruption, and what can you as managers or aspiring managers do about it? So the topic today at hand is organizational identity. It is a topic that is so important and yet is often forgotten in organizational conversations or does not directly come up. And the reason why I chose this is that identity underlies so many organizational decisions, processes. So I'll tell you about it. I'll tell you what organizational identity is, why it matters. I'll tell you why does it become an important strategic conversation to have in such times as we're facing right now, in times of disruptions. And then I'll tell you what can you do about it. So the biggest takeaway from today's webinar, which I hope you will take away with you, is that identity matters and that you can at least do things about it within your organizations. Either have direct conversations with your employees during times of disruption or reinforce organizational identity through indirect means. And as I wind up, I'll also talk about those. So a bit of a background before I really begin to talk about it. I actually, as Abdul mentioned, and thank you for the introduction, Abdul, I have been a business student all along. I did my BBA, MBA, MSc from Brock, and then I went ahead to do my PhD. During my PhD, I came across this particular organization that was facing a big disruption. And that there was a physical disruption. They were a nonprofit organization serving homeless people, but they were kind of forced to move out of their area because a huge modern hockey arena was constructed right in front of them. And the social dynamic in the area became a little bit tense, but also very interesting. On the one hand, there were homeless people. On the other hand, there were hockey fans who were, the urban rich crowd. And then, instead of moving and facing that push, the organization resisted. So I became interested in what they were doing. And as the dynamics unfolded, I noticed that their identity became stronger with time. The organization began representing itself much more strongly. So because I was coming from that background, when COVID hit us, it gave me the opportunity to really think about, okay, here's another disruption, and what can organizations do about it? And so it seemed all too familiar. And so I'm really grateful that I'm able to discuss it with you today. So now diving right into this, what is organizational identity really? Well, identity is defined as those central, enduring, and distinctive characteristics about any organization that make it stand apart from a bunch of other similar organizations. So let's say if you are a nonprofit and you're based in the Niagara region and you're only serving the people of Niagara and you choose not to go outside of that region, then your employees and your external stakeholders, such as customers, might come to understand you as a Niagara-based organization. We are a local organization. We are a Niagara organization. When the researchers are identity researchers, management researchers, when we study an organization's identity, we ask people, we go to these organizations and we generally have conversations with its employees. And we ask them one basic question. We ask, who do you think you are as an organization? And that was not meant in a bad way. We just say, who are you as an organization? Can you tell us, how can you define yourself? And when people think about that question and answer that question, we say that the answer to who we are as an organization represents their perceptions of organizational identity. Now, I'll give an example from my own research. So when I studied this organization, I went and I asked people, now again, this was the same homeless serving organization that I was talking about. And I asked these people, these employees, frontline staff, I asked middle management, I asked top management, I asked them, who are you as an organization? And then they would answer, and then I created this word cloud based on their answers, and it came out that they were a family. They were a community. They were all about the people. They were all about their staff. They were an inner city organization. The place was really important for them. So all these things then tell me how their employees think or perceive the identity of that organization. Hang on to this information for a little while because I'll come back to this in the next few slides. So I told you what an organization's identity is. It is those core, distinct, enduring characteristics of an organization that make it stand apart from others. and it's about how people perceive who the organization is, then why does it matter? Well, it matters because a lot of processes happening at the organization are guided by an organization's identity. Now, let me tell you this, or let me rather ask you a question. When you take any action, when you're at a crossroads, when you take any action, you probably decide what you want to do based on a simple understanding of who you are and what you stand for. Is that not true? Now, the same is true for an organization's identity. It has roots in what we know as social identity theory. It goes back more than 3 decades. The concept goes back like a lot in time. And essentially, what social identity theory states that is people have innate needs to belong in categories. Now, if there are any psychologists listening to me, it may be overly simple to them. The idea is that people understand their self or themselves just by categorizing themselves as part of different groups, categorizing others in part of different groups. Now, this category membership gives them an idea of who they are and who they are not. And based on this very basic understanding, they go ahead and they take several actions. Either they study, or they work at a particular organization, or they marry a certain person. Many individual decisions in life are based on this very basic understanding of who they are. And the same is true for organizations. That's what research on identity in organizations has found, that essentially the singular feeling or the singular understanding or perception of who we are and what we do and what we stand for guides an organization's strategy. It guides what kind of people an organization hires. It guides how that organization measures performance of its employees. It guides them how it rewards those employees. It guides them what new products or services it wants to offer. It guides them what regions does it want to grow into? Does it want to grow or not at all? Does it want to stay small? So identity matters essentially because it shapes a lot of organizational processes. And I can tell you this by means of my personal reading of the literature, that successful organizations have figured out one thing, and they have figured out who they are and what they stand for. Because if this understanding is clear, then it becomes easier to make decisions when you are at a crossroads. Let me give you a few examples, and these are based on the literature that I also cite on this very same slide. Now, an Italian manufacturer of household goods, Alessi, was an organization that was known for, manufacturing household items, sometimes furniture, sometimes cutlery, crockery. Now, at that point, its members or its employees understood it as a workshop. Alessi's top management, it was a family business. So when this young generation CEO comes in, he decides that we want to do some things different. And so he really hires designers to design the products for Alessi. What happens? The designers create designs, but the workmen are not able to convert those designs into how the designer's vision is. Before, the workman was the boss, and now the designer is the boss. So what happens? There is confusion among employees about who we really are. Are we a designer company or are we a workshop? So what does Alessi do? In order to come out of this conflict, what Alessi did was a bit of identity redefinition. So they made sure that all of the employees knew that Alessi was moving towards being a designer company from being a workshop. And when they relabeled it, when people understood Alessi differently, that's when they were able to successfully incorporate design elements into their goods. Similarly, in the interest of time, maybe I won't go through all of these examples, but let me give you the example of Eugene, Oregon. Eugene was known as a track town because it produced some of the best runners, some of the best athletes. But at one point, one of the athletes passed away. The other athlete that followed didn't really fill in to the footsteps. And eventually, Eugene lost the identity which its members thought was a track town. The track that defined Eugene was deteriorated. What needed to be done? The identity needed to be regrafted. The identity needed to be rekindled in order for people to understand Eugene as a track town. So I gave you the examples of how identity really matters at organizations. If people are not clear about who the organization is and what it stands for, there are confusions, there are conflicts, and sometimes it can become messy to deal with those conflicts. So now, interestingly, my dissertation was based on disruptions and identity, and that's what I'm talking about today. So let me also tell you why disruptions matter to organizations. Now, an organization is defined by a host of things, and a few core things are the core purpose of an organization, the structure of an organization, and the people that work for it. What happens when a disruption hits in? It might create some environmental threats. It might create some new opportunities. I think it will be too relatable for all of you when I tell you that when COVID hit, a lot of organizations decided that they can expand their reach. They can go online, and they can actually, and I'm talking in the context of nonprofit organizations. For example, I know for sure Bethesda Services did. I know in speaking of organizations in the Niagara region. And so what happens when disruption hits? It creates havoc in the environment. That havoc either leads to opportunities, or leads to threats, or leads to some kind of changes. Many organizations want to make use of those changes. So those changes might require the organization to change the product or service offering, change how it offers the products or its services, or might require them to hire new kind of people, or let go of some of the people. So essentially, disruptions matter because when they hit, they shake up the whole structure of the organization in terms of providing new opportunities, maybe changing how the organization is structured, and maybe even what kind of people work for the organization. So, okay, well, if this change is happening, why does it matter to organizational identity? Well, it matters to organizational identity because now the core purpose of the organization has been shaken up. The structure of the organization is probably changing, and maybe we're letting go of a few people. I told you to hang on to the information that I was presenting before because I was going to use it later. And now recall that the organization's members told me that they thought they were a family. They thought they were a community. They thought they were all about the people that work there. They thought they were all about the staff. They thought they were all about people who used the services. So now when this disruption hit, the organization started collaborating with others. They built this strong collaboration of 14 other organizations, and they said, hey, you know what? We're not going to move out of the area. We're going to put up a proposal, and we're going to develop our own bigger and better building right here in the inner city, right in front of this giant arena. And so homeless people can also have a bigger home. One thing led to another, and the organization had a lot of opportunities for growth. So these collaborations opened up a host of opportunities which the organization started pursuing. I'm not exaggerating when I'm telling you that this organization grew over 30% for 3 consecutive years between 2016 and 2019. Over 30% in 3 consecutive years. Can you imagine when a small organization, which is a close-knit community, which is a close-knit family, is now expanding and growing so much? There were a lot of confusions among employees about who the organization is now. Are we really a community? Since I don't get to spend as much time with co-workers as I used before, or I don't work that much in the trenches. I'm now required to do more filing. I'm now required to do more reporting. Are we still a very close-knit family and community because we're now so formal? So you see what I mean? When disruptions occur, they create opportunities for an organization, or threats which the organization evades or makes use of. And based on those actions, it may shake a few core things about the organization, a few core characteristics of the organization. And so people in the organization are then thinking, okay, who are we? And so disruptions can create confusions regarding organizational identity. All right, so let me give you a few more examples here of how disruptions disrupted identity dynamics at different organizations. Now, Lego, especially those of you who have kids or as kids, we probably played with these small little bricks, colorful bricks, and we made shapes out of them. I did. My daughter does now. And so a very well-known company, Lego, they noticed that there was an opportunity for them to move beyond those little bricks. So what the opportunity was? The opportunity was to enter into media. So the organization started obtaining patents for movies and patents for media. They opened a division which was called Lego Media. In turn, opening Lego Media confused not only their employees, but also confused customers and other stakeholders about, okay, what does Lego really stand for then? I thought they were a toy manufacturer. They were not into media. And so they needed to do considerable identity work. They needed to sit with their, all the management needed to sit with the employees and correct their understanding of where the organization was going. And that's what we call identity work in organizational identity research. So you either reinforce, change, or manage how people understand who you are. Another example here, a well-known company, Bang & Olufsen, they were their environment necessitated that they make consistent changes. So between 2008 2010, they were facing this disruptive environment, which necessitated them to consistently respond to shifts in their environment. And so the organization, in terms of recession, in terms of changing markets. So a lot of things that the organization did were different from how they would do before. That created confusions. In order to avoid those confusions, the organization did corrective work by taking into account people's perceptions of the organization's identity. Another example, Cinecma is one of France's largest aircraft engine manufacturers, and they were entering into a host of collaborations with other companies to learn a few things. However, people at the organization felt that when we enter into those collaborations, we learn ways from them, but then it doesn't stand true to what we stand for. Again, in that case, the organization needed to consistently work on making sure that people understand who they are in order to successfully carry out those collaborative projects. My point, to sum up these examples, is that when disruptions interfere with how an organization does things over time or has been doing things over time, it becomes imperative to have identity-related conversations, at least within your organization. Now, what can you do about it? Well, especially if a disruption is giving the opportunity for growth, then plan it. Now, this may seem really counterintuitive to hear, how can I plan my organic growth? It doesn't make any sense. And I can appreciate that. And what I really mean here is that you can build capabilities that make you resilient to deal with those disruptive changes over time. So if you can learn how to manage with change, then you can plan which opportunities you can take, which opportunities you cannot take. Especially with respect to organizational identity, research suggests a number of things that you can do, and I will sum up 2 broad approaches for managers today that they can take when they decide to have identity-related conversations within their organizations. The first approach is to have direct conversations, and the second approach is to have indirect conversations or indirect reinforcements. A little bit of background here. Now, identity is not just the employee's perception of who the organization is, but, and I think this is all too familiar to the managers here in the session, that an organization has a variety of stakeholders, shareholders, customers, interest groups. You need to send clear and consistent signals to each one of these stakeholder groups so that they can clearly understand and categorize your organization. In terms of coming back to this, you can have a number of ways in which you can directly engage your stakeholders in conversations. The biggest stakeholder for organizational identity, I would say, is the organization's employees. It is imperative that there is internal clarity what the organization is, what it stands for. You can hold town halls. You can do employee surveys. You don't need a fancy survey. You can just develop a few questions on your own, which speak to the core characteristics of the organization. What do you think the organization is? What do you think our core business is? And then you can circulate the survey. One thing I would say, though, caution is that you must make sure that you follow up on the surveys. Management retreat sessions. Does the top management even know who the organization is? Well, take them out. Take them out for a day, 8 hours. Have someone come in and facilitate a session who can then sum up for you what management thinks what the organization stands for. Have focus groups with your staffs. Have small groups come in, and then someone, maybe you don't need to do it internally, maybe you can have someone external come in to facilitate those sessions. Just if you think that they're being biased by your presence, as top managers' presence sometimes may, you can simply solicit their opinions on who they think the organization is. If you see discrepant messages, then you can definitely deal with that. Indirect reinforcement. Well, you had direct conversations, but now there are several ways in which organizations consistently reinforce who they are and what they stand for. For example, your logo, your branding. Such things can be known as identity claims. What kind of products or services are you offering? Are you changing them a lot? Are you in the consistent line of business? Are you changing consistently your geographical reach? So those are all signals or identity claims of what the organization stands for. Then the key point here would be to align your actions with the claims. And I think it's fairly straightforward. Then organizational history, culture, and founders. You can invoke those. For example, we have always been doing XYZ, or the founder of the organization had XYZ vision, or this is not our culture to let's say, reprimand employees for XYZ, or to be unkind to customers or whatever. And finally, stakeholder engagement. So you can bring not only internal employees, but also external stakeholders, which you think are key, and ask them if they clearly understand what your organization stands for. If not, then obviously it is time to address that. To sum up, identity underlies a host of organizational processes, and especially the strategy. And the key is to see who we are, and when the disruption hits, who we can be. Are we taking up certain opportunities? And then what is sustainable for us to do in the future? So to sum up, I really implore you to have conversations about organizational identity. Think who you are and what you stand for, especially in the times of disruption. With this, I thank you very much for your attention today. And over to you, Abdul.
Asma, thank you very much. Very insightful. Here's some questions. I'm just going to jump right into these.
Yeah.
Come in. I want to capture as many of these. Okay, what can you do if you disagree with your organization's cultural identity?
That's an interesting question. I think the question is actually a two-part question. So first of all, I have to say that culture and identity are not the same thing, though they are deeply intertwined. So what is culture? Culture is a set of symbols. It is a set of stated and unstated norms, rules, policies, your artifacts, the systems that you have at an organization that together kind of tell us what is okay to do at an organization, and what is not okay to do at an organization. So that's culture. And identity is actually given by you can say that culture informs people's understanding of what the organization is and what it stands for. So if you don't agree with an organization's culture, the literature says that people can do 3 or 4 things. And those are passive to aggressive modes of reaction. If you don't agree with it, the most passive and aggressive way to gather is to exit, to look for other options which might better fit you. And it might not seem very, I would say it might not seem routine, but it is actually okay to ask questions as an employee or as a candidate as well during your interview. So when you go, not only observe but ask questions. How does work happen here? What do you stand for and stuff like that. So stuff which people might qualify as fluff is extremely important to understand. So, and then the second thing that you can do if you don't agree is to voice your concerns. Find some like-minded people and see if you can actually reach out to someone in the top management and tell them that you think things are not working well. Maybe that will be rewarded. Who knows? The most passive thing to do is to just ignore it and live with it. So I would say there are a range of options that you can pursue if you don't agree with an organization's culture, or if you feel that you don't identify with a particular organization.
Yeah, that latter piece of staying quiet and not responding, as someone put an analogy for me once, is like that small grain of sand that you may find in your shoe, and you say, yeah, okay, I'm gonna live with this for a little while. But after a while, if you don't deal with it, if you don't take that grain of sand out, as small as it may be, it might turn into a blister, and then you have a much bigger fish to fry.
Correct.
Taking this question in here, and you alluded to this. So if you're, depending on where you are in the organizational spectrum, in the hierarchy, if you're a subordinate, if you're lower in, what may be your advice versus if you are higher up in the organization? How would you differentiate their influence and what they could do in terms of both identity and culture?
So I'll repeat, so just to make sure that I understand the question, because I lost you for just a teeny second.
That's all right.
Are you asking how could top managers versus, let's say, a frontline staff member differentiate in their understanding of identity, or?
How would your advice might differentiate depending on where you are in the organization, if you're a top manager, senior leadership team, versus if you're a frontline?
Yeah, so the organization that I saw very closely when studying for my doctoral dissertation for almost 19 months, and from what I've read on identity, is that top managers are sometimes actually looking for suggestions from frontline staff. So they might be too far away from how things actually work in real life. So my suggestion for top managers would be to keep a close eye on suggestions coming from the bottom, suggestions coming from the ground, because they're really close to reality. They're really close to the real world. Maybe you develop a policy, but they will probably know better than you if the policy is actually going to take effect and work. And my suggestion for bottom level employees is exactly the same. Sometimes people are looking for good suggestions, and if you think that you have a suggestion that might actually work for the whole organization, bring it forward.
Right. How often do you see, I guess, two parts of this question. So where do you see is the onus? Is it more on the top management or frontline, to sort of differentiating those two? If we go to these, I guess, extremes, everything else should fall within. Where do you see the onus being and the ownership of culture and identity coming from? And who should, which of these two segments do you think should bring it up? And perhaps how often?
Oh, I think that this is an excellent question, I have to say, because one of the central debates in the identity literature is, where does identity come from in the first place? So one of the sources of identity is the founder of an organization or the group of founders themselves. So for example, if a person is creating an organization, they certainly have a vision. So they start doing things in a certain way. And now the thing about identity is that it is not only one way, but it is actually a dual reinforcement. So let's say you develop a strategy as a top manager, you develop a strategy, and that strategy helps the lower level staff lower level staff help understand who the organization is, but they will interpret that strategy based on who they are and their own knowledge and their own experiences, and they will enact it a certain way. Once the lower level staff enacts the strategy at frontline, at that point, top management might actually take something and tweak the strategy. So actually, identity processes are mutually reinforced between top management and frontline staff. So it's a really complex topic, probably not good enough to be discussed in 30 minutes. But I want to say that you've touched upon an extremely important aspect of identity. So it's mutual. I want to say there's no one group that takes the onus. Maybe it starts coming from top, but it very much gets shaped at the bottom, depending on how people understand the claims. And you said, to what extent conversations of identity should be held. I wouldn't say it's like an everyday thing. So it definitely keeps existing in the background, and it keeps, making people move forward. But I have to say that it becomes extremely important when anything at the organization is changing. So let's say when you are starting a new project, or when you're starting a new product, when you're thinking about entering a new service, go back and think to yourself, who do we really are? And then decide to go that way or not. So I want to say, especially when you're making any kind of change.
And that's an excellent segue to this next point. So looking at times of extreme change, like a pandemic, COVID being an example of such, how do you see this affecting an organization's culture or its identity? And do you see that could this be a point of pivoting, or is it a point for survival?
Oh, I think it's again a great question, Abdul. I recently read this article in Harvard Business Review, which talks about how the pandemic causes organizations to pivot. And I'm using the term rather broadly, in the sense that the pandemic creates a change in the environment. So when the situation becomes kind of malleable, it can either present, or it can do both as well. It can either present an opportunity for the organization to take away, let's say. So I was talking to a few nonprofits, and I found out that by means of my teaching, of course, I was connected with them. And I found out that because they were forced to shut down, they quickly came up with some new ways of doing things. So the people were obviously staying at home, but they were providing services by going online. And so obviously you don't get to see those same people, you don't get to see those same cues that are reinforcing the understanding of who the organization is and what it stands for. And so I think my suggestion in that sense would be, if management feels that, the strings are being pulled apart at any point, or maybe even before that, it is time to actually have a conversation about who the organization really is. And just in order to reinforce that, because it's easy to lose sight of those important cues. And if you do lose sight of who the organization really is and what it stands for, like I said, there are so many examples that we have seen that it creates a host of confusions, and those are not good.
Right.
So
yes.
Definitely can create opportunities or threats, which can cause the organization to manage accordingly.
Mm-hmm. A question that's come from one of our international students, I imagine, just by the context, so not directly related to what you have in here. In the current pandemic, how can an educational institution support international students like myself in order to accommodate academic growth and nurture the ability for graduate students to be at their maximum academic potential? As a past international student, you may have some additional insights to offer.
Sure. Yeah, I was an international student once myself. So that's also a very relevant question. And given that we are in the situation that we can ask for to be, I think that there are a host of things that, for example, Brock is doing. Because I'm in this context, not biased, but just because it's so recent, I'm just thinking of sessions like these. Maybe I'm not the best presenter ever, but I can guarantee that Brock has so many qualified faculty who are coming for this series. And I mean, I think if people can take advantage of that. As for myself, I do know that I am right now designing a curriculum for my MBA students in the strategy course coming up for fall. And I have made sure that it is a rigorous course, and I know that other faculty at Brock are doing the same, because we are in constant conversations about how can we help ensure that our students, especially international students, can get the same quality of education even in these circumstances. So I can assure the person asking the question that people are putting in their best effort to make sure that they get them the best curriculum possible, which is cutting edge. So very recent readings, hands-on experience. So as you know, Abdul, we have a service learning component that we take very seriously at Brock. So people engage in a group project who are coming to our classes, and they engage with a real life community partner, and they do a consulting project for them in my class for at least. And so I think there are a number of things that the university has been doing. We have been issuing communications. I know that our dean has been really active in reaching out to other community constituents in ensuring that Brock is on top of things, really. So I'm confident that the term will go very well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, it is obviously a time of uncertainty and many questions for many in this sense, and that unknown itself causes anxiety. And so it's quite understandable, and obviously in this context, that makes even more so. One of the positives that, if I can add a piece here, that I have seen from the pandemic, and by virtue of going online and virtual, reaching out to folks and having speakers come from all over the corners of the world is now very much possible. Something that wasn't quite the same in the pre-COVID area. All that individual has to do, all that individual has to do is log in for 30 minutes or whatever that happens to be, and then they can broadcast and speak directly to a number of students. So that's one of the things that I have seen fellow faculty members at Brock and at Goodman in particular, reaching out to CEOs and prominent figures in the relevant business sectors and having them invite and be part of the courses. And that's wonderful, because our students now get to hear and listen from these individuals. Asma, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and being here, especially while you're in the middle of preparing for the fall setting, which is about 3 weeks away, less than 3 weeks.
Thank you, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you really for the opportunity, and again, a heartfelt thank you to all the participants today.
Of course. I do want to talk about the next week, the session that's coming up. So our session next week will be, again, on Wednesday, same time, 11 to 11:45. So that is Wednesday, the 26th. And COVID, using it as an opportunity for systems change towards sustainability. Such an important topic. And that's going to be led by our professor, our Goodman Group professor from the MIPS department, Dr. Sylvia Graywatch, who will be leading that discussion next week. So I hope many of you can join us then. I also like to bring to your attention a info session that's coming up between now and then on the 24th. So you would have heard me speak about the nonprofit program, the excellent, if I might add, nonprofit leadership certificate program that's offered by Goodman Group's professional development program. You already know, and you would have heard me speak about the limited number of seats that are there. Many of those, more than 50%, have already been filled. So I hope you will have the opportunity to reserve your seats. But we've also heard your calls for more information around this, and striving for excellence and answering your questions in one setting. So we have developed and designed this info session that's going to be coming up on the 24th at 2 to 2:45, where you will hear from a panel of that involves an instructor who is involved in delivery of content for the program, a past participant, and a leader of an organization who will provide you her insights and what it was like being a participant, but also what it means for her organization. And of course, knowing the troubles and challenges of the nonprofit sector, and funding is always an issue. So the nonprofit sector could benefit from funding opportunities. And that's where Paul's insight in terms of possible funding opportunities, not just for this program, but for other programs as well, could come into play. So I hope you can join us for that on the 24th at 2 to 2:45. Where we will share with you more information about the Nonprofit Leadership Certificate Program. I want to take this opportunity to thank Asma once again, but also thank you, our audience, for being here, for taking time out of your busy schedule. Stay tuned in terms of what's going to come up to your, in terms of what's going to land in your inboxes in relation to the recordings and the material that we covered today. So that will appear over the next couple of days. And of course, we'll see you again next week. Until then, stay safe.